You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So this trajectory that is set in that first 6 months rarely changes. I've had experience in an organization where we had a product that in clinical trials showed amazing safety, efficacy, and tolerability. But when it got into the real world, into the hands of the physicians, the tolerability was a major issue. We didn't have a plan in place. And there was very much a reactive messaging system that had to happen. And the competitors in the marketplace leveraged those tolerability issues and really dial those up. So having learned that, I think it's all about scenario planning. It's having plan B, plan C. If you have the time to do that.
Hello, and welcome to Pharma Sessions, a place for pharmaceutical leaders to come and learn from each other. I'm your host, Jonathan Kaskey. Technology and market trends are bringing change at an ever-accelerating rate, and no person, team, or company can afford to be left behind. Here, we dive into the strategies and tactics that our guests use to tackle these challenges and create new opportunities, and how you can do the same in your own organization. Welcome. So my guest today is Martin McLaughlin, Head of Launch and Business Excellence at Takeda. I saw Martin speak at a recent conference and was really psyched that he accepted my invitation to come on the show. So thank you, Martin. And as listeners of the show know, I really appreciate a good framework. And today the discussion is going to be around Martin's 4-step playbook for maximizing pharmaceutical launches. So with that said, welcome to the show, Martin, and we can dive right in.
Great.
Excellent. So before we get into everything we're going to talk about, it's always nice to get to know each other a little bit. And I found the best way to do that is to ask a simple question, which is, it's 9:05 a.m. Eastern time. What have you had to eat so far today?
I've had a protein shake and some coffee. I've been up since 4:30 a.m., hit the gym. And so set the day up.
All right. What's behind the 4:30 wake up?
Get the gym out of the way. Opens at 5 a.m. So best way to start the day, yeah.
I completely agree, although I'm not quite there at 4:30. I'm a 5:45 wake up. But what's funny is everybody asks this question too. The food varies. Sometimes it's no food, sometimes it's not. I've yet to ask somebody who's skipped the caffeine. So take that for what it's worth. All right.
Coffee is critical.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump in here. So tell me a little bit about your background. What drew you to biopharmaceuticals? And then how did you get interested in launch? So just tell me the story.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this industry for about 25 years. My background is in science and industrial microbiology and chemistry. When I was in college, I actually worked for Coca-Cola as a sales merchandiser. So that kind of got me into the field of sales. And, I didn't want to be stuck in a lab. I didn't want to be pipetting A to B and getting into the research field. I was more into dealing with people and had a natural ability to try and get into medical sales, which was challenging at that point in time back in the early 2000s. I moved to Australia I was traveling for about a year, and I got fortunate enough to work at Pfizer. And that was my first introduction into the industry. Then moved back to Ireland, and the story is really history. I moved through various organizations. I worked at Shearing AG, which are now, then moved to Biogen in sales from the MS portfolio. And then that's when I started getting into launches. I think that was my first real launch, was as a sales rep. I've had experience launching as a salesperson, as a sales leader. I've had experience building local launches, global launches, launches from every different facet, really, being part of a marketing team and then leading a launch center of excellence, which is, my previous role.
That's fascinating, right? So we'll get into the framework, but do you see those different experiences as being helpful, right? Because there's a lot of moving parts to a launch and all those players need to work together. So I would imagine it's super helpful to have actually been in the field and been in marketing and understand the different pressures that everybody is facing.
Absolutely, because I think you need to be thinking about the end user, right? Well, your customer, your physician, and your patient, obviously, the end recipient of the drug you're trying to launch. So working your way back along that process and that journey, the different people that need to be educated along the way, and they need to understand what the strategy is, and they need to be able to execute on that. So yeah, for sure. I mean, when in the field, you're focused on, okay, we got a product to launch and we got to hit those numbers and we got to do it quick. And when you're looking further back, if you're thinking about launching from a phase 2 perspective, what's their target product profile going to look like? What's the data going to look like? And what will it ultimately be 5 years down the line? And how do you communicate that message? So a lot of different things to consider, a lot of different stakeholders to include.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the framework. And then I want to come back to this kind of the timing of it, right? Of when you start planning for a launch. So you just alluded to phase 2, right? So if you could just summarize, and then we'll dig into each point, what is your framework, the 4-step playbook here that you're talking about?
I mean, for me, actually, my career has always been built around 3 components, right? 3 pillars. And I think I've added on the fourth one in terms of this playbook, where it's really around people, it's around process, it's around performance. And now it's more around technology as we move forward into the likes of AI, and how can we really leverage all of that?
So maybe we take them one by one. When you say it's about people, so people, process, performance, and then unfortunately technology does not also start with a P. So you start with people, right? Because ultimately it is the people in these various roles that are supporting that. So tell me, how does that factor in? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been fortunate enough to work with great teams, build high-performing teams, especially with launches. I think it's about collaboration, right? First of all, there's 2 components. There's the capability to be able to launch, to understand what you need to do from a marketing standpoint, and then an additional functional standpoint, but the cross-functional collaboration. And, that needs to start early. It's building those cross-functional teams and being able to work as one team. And what I've seen, in many organizations, especially through launches, you have a nice you don't have a cohesive team. You have a cross-functional team, and everybody is working in parallel play, doing their own thing in their own silo, right? They're not working as an ideal team. I think, recent statistics said only 23% of organizations really feel there's true cross-functional collaboration, right? And I think the learning from that is, what this playbook states is that you really need to have shared goals within this launch team, because they meet on a regular basis, yet they just provide updates and then they walk away. But if you have shared goals, you've got shared metrics and you shared components that you need to deliver upon, then that makes a successful launch team.
Yeah, because you can imagine, and I mean, all this stuff plays together, I'm sure, but the technology, for example, allowing that sharing of data where you don't want MSLs and salespeople, for example, harassing the same doctor with either the same or different messages, right? There needs to be some type of cohesive strategy, even amongst groups that traditionally might not have worked together, so hand in glove. Are you putting formal structures in place? Are you encouraging informal, regular meetings? How are you pushing people to get out of their silos?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I've learned is the earlier you start, the better the relationship becomes with the team as well, right? So I know, for example, in previous organizations, we've started to launch activation workshops at phase 2, when you start to bring the people together, right? And, at that top point in time, you can set your shared goals for this team. I mean, everyone has their own individual performance indicators or your own plans, but if the team has its performance goals in place, then they're on the right track to execute and deliver on those, right? So essentially what gets measured gets done. I think that's important, that everyone's aligned on that. And you don't see that in every launch team, right? They, like I said, they provide an update. They're working on their own individual goals. So their medical goal, their commercial goal, their, CMC goal, clinical development goal, those kinds of things. They're not necessarily the overall program team goal. So I think that's important.
So you had talked about this idea, talking about goals and metrics around launch performance indicators, call them LPIs, different from traditional KPIs, as kind of a way to help predict launch success prior to a product coming to market. Can you talk more about what that means and how you're looking at that?
Yeah, and that was not a novel project, essentially, that myself and the team developed around probably 2 or 3 years ago. And we looked at, you've obviously got your lagging indicators when you launch, your penetration, your sales data, your market share, revenue, etc. But what do we have before we launch? I think was important. And then what do we have to measure the strategy? So these launch performance indicators were designed to measure if your strategy was on point. So, you do your brand plan, or you do your launch plan, you have your strategic imperatives, but how do you know if they're right? You've built them off the data you might have, you've built them off your target product profile. But what's the market reflecting in terms of, is this the right strategy? And are we going to execute on this strategy? And I think that the learning, and we did, shift elements of strategy based on these performance indicators to make sure that we were ready for launch. And, it's by picking up noise in the market. So you're getting information from investors, you're getting information from your healthcare professionals, the intent to prescribe, the awareness, where is the business going to come from? And, that enables you to understand whether the strategy that you're playing for is right, and whether you need to shift focus or stay with that strategy.
So how do you communicate, kind of carry those goals down into the field? So for example, right, at the end of the day, if I'm a sales rep, right, like I probably know my IC like the back of my hand, right? And the attitude oftentimes is say whatever you want. Like what you're really telling me you want to do is what you're compensating me for. So how do you how do you marry those two things together and make sure that everybody's kind of marching to one song sheet?
Yeah, I think it's all about preparation, right? Planning, preparation, and execution, clear execution. I think before you get to launch, way far ahead of launch, your sales team should be able to segment, target, understand where the actual potential is, right? Know their territory inside and out, know where the initial prescriptions will come from, understand who those early adopters are, right? Again, it could be the 80-20 rule where 20% of the business is going to come from, or 80% of the business could come from 20% of your territory on day one. So in an ideal environment, you are able to hit go the minute that product is approved and you have patients ready to go on board. And I think that's the important part. So it's understanding where that is, and it's understanding that, that relationship between the higher level strategy of what we need to do for rapid uptake versus the execution on the ground for, every salesperson wants to be successful. So yes, I agree that the incentive compensation is something there, but everybody wants to launch a product as successfully as you can. The launch window is 6 months. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So the trajectory that is set in that first 6 months rarely changes.
Yeah. And so then I love this concept of like a launch is just so much all at once. And it's usually years of planning going to it, but sometimes things don't go according to plan, right? Like you're making estimates based on data and based on predictive modeling or however you're doing it. How do you balance like adherence to plan versus being flexible and recognizing when things need to shift or you need to change strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this in my experience too. Some launches, they're no-brainers, right? They're very easy. It's you follow the playbook and you just execute flawlessly, and that's lucky. And I mean, I've been fortunate to be part of those launches where there's been limited competition, where the uptake's been high, where there's a huge unmet medical need. There's no other product out there, so it's a win. Then you launch in a very competitive environment, and it's understanding how the market will react to that environment. And I've had experience in an organization where we had a product that in clinical trials showed amazing safety, efficacy, and tolerability. But when it got into the real world, into the hands of the physicians, the tolerability was a major issue. And we didn't have a plan in place. And there was very much a reactive messaging system that had to happen. And the competitors in the marketplace leveraged those tolerability issues and really, really dial those up. So having learned that, I think it's all about scenario planning. It's having plan B, plan C, if you have the time to do that. But again, to your point, if you have to pivot, your date gets moved earlier, which every company wants to move faster. How do you have a plan that you can still execute on that will deliver if you get an early launch date?
That's amazing, right? Because there's so much that goes into a launch date where it's everything. I mean, whether or not the local organization accepts your label, right? There's a million times this can get delayed or things can shift. So basically what you're looking at is you're saying, okay, whenever day zero is, this is the plan, and we have that in place, and we're going to be ready to execute that plan whenever that day zero comes. Is that the general idea?
Ideally, it's a launch readiness date, right? What is a launch readiness date? When you get your PDUFA, or, if we're talking US, or when you're going to get your full European approval, you can hit one of the European markets. You want to be ahead of that date. So you want to have an early launch readiness date to build in for that flexibility in case something does shift. That's the way I've worked in the past. And it's been, things do get approved earlier, so you do need to be ready to go. And then sometimes for a lot of the times they'll get delayed, right? So then you're in a better position because you can do more work.
Yeah. So I think we covered a little bit of the people, a little bit of, they all sort of blend together, right? Which makes sense. But what we're talking about now is kind of in the process and performance. So I just want to maybe drill down a little bit around, I think it makes sense, right? Where we've covered your creating clear, measurable goals so people know how to do that. But then from a process standpoint, I'm still a little unclear on how you go about getting huge organizations aligned on this type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, look, the playbook essentially, or the process for launch hasn't changed, right? In the last 20 years, we still have to do the same stuff, right? You still have to educate the market, highlight the unmet medical need, get the scientific story out there, build your messaging, build your platforms, and then, deliver the messaging and the campaign and execute with excellence. That has to happen. It's how do you do that in a more agile fashion, right? I think that's a big learning as we move forward and you want to do things quicker. Again, it ties back to the people, right? It's having the right team in place, whether you're a center of excellence from a launch standpoint or whether you have a launch individual on a marketing team and their responsibility is launch and they coordinate. And I've done both, right? So they coordinate the launch operations team and they pull the people together, via a sub team or a commercial sub team. And it's all about getting it done as early as you possibly can. But that process in terms of, and then how do you, I think the other piece here, which you haven't touched on, is playbooks, right? Launch excellence playbooks. And I've created many of those. It's, people move on, people get developed. If you start working with a launch in phase 2, chances are a lot of those people may disappear. They may move on to different roles, right? So what have you got that is left in place if that team disappears tomorrow? And that's a playbook. It's a solid playbook that shows you can pick it up if you would just come into the organization. Where do you go for what do you need to do and where are we at? That's the playbook piece. Second piece then is the tracking element, right? Having a consistent tracking component or platform that is shared across the organization. And I haven't seen that done well yet. We've had legacy platforms that a global team will use, then a US team will use something slightly different.
And what type of things are you referring to tracking here?
In terms of tracking the steps and stages of launch. So, in terms of where, essentially back down to a project plan, but how that information is put in. So when a country is getting ready for their launch and it needs to be rolled up to a higher level and it needs to be seen by, say, a global team, for example, are they using the exact same platform to do that? The framework has to be the same, which you still have to check off those things. But then, you've got all these fancy launch excellence tools now that companies are trying to sell, trying to deliver on. At the end of the day, it still has to be consistent across an organization.
So I've always been much more on the startup kind of tech side, and there's a reluctance on this side to do documentation and playbooks. Is like, oh, well, we need to move fast. And one of the leaders that I really appreciate, he would always talk about it. He called it the bus factor, which is what happens if Martin gets hit by a bus tomorrow, right? Like, does all that information go away? And it doesn't if you write it down. And I think so. When you're doing playbooks, I'm assuming these are roughly the same, but how much of it is same, different from various launches, and when in the process are you starting? When I say process, I mean like the drug development process. Are you starting to create these?
Well, I mean, I think look, you have a playbook that you can bring in from previous launches, right? Because you know what needs to be done, and then it depends on. It's a living document. That's the issue with a lot of these as well. So they have to be constantly updated. However, like I mentioned, the process of launching doesn't change, right? Some of the nuances and specifics, depending on whether you're in very rare disease or whether there's competition, there's not, that might need to be tweaked, but it should be a document that can be up, it's as simple as an interactive PDF, right? That can be just leveraged. Click, it'll bring you to whatever way your organization set up, SharePoint sites, whatever, brings you to where you need to be.
Right. And this is something that I would imagine most teams are this concept is not unique to launch, right? Where the SciComs, they have their single point of truth for everything that you're meant to share, and likewise throughout the organization. So you're just saying launch is its own special beast in some ways, but we're going to operate in just a very organized fashion to, treat it with some rigor, basically.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk about the technology aspect, because this is, it's all over the news, and it's even just on a personal level. Like, I find day to day, I'll talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, we just developed a novel molecule through AI that would have taken us years. I'm like, that's amazing. And then I go into ChatGPT and try to make some simple changes to an Excel. And I'm like, you spent $400 billion developing this piece of junk that can't do anything. So where do you manage tech from where we are right now and what's coming?
I think tech's one of those things. I've heard digital, we need to be more digitally friendly, digital focused over the last probably 10 to 15 years. Every organization's been, we need to focus on digital, omni-channel digital. Now we're in a true world of AI where you can see the value quicker and you can really define what that means. I think there's many things that AI can do, and then there's a couple of things that it cannot do, right? And obviously we want to be more agile. The bigger pharma companies want to move quicker. The individuals want to be more productive, and you can leverage a lot on AI for helping support internal capabilities, but then externally, what can it tell you as well? It can spot patterns, it can scale content, and can help you optimize your targeting and your approach for the field. But one thing AI can't do is build trust, right? So you can never do that with that type of learning or that type of intelligence. So you still need people to build those face-to-face relationships, build the trust of physicians, and be able to educate in that regard.
and even from the kind of data gathering and pattern recognition, like you need to know where you're pointing the machine, right? And you need to be able to ask really smart questions and then have enough knowledge to understand what you're getting back and if it's truly answering the question or not. Where I've seen the most interesting progress being made is when people are using it. I don't want to call it a point solution, but the molecule development is a very interesting example, right? That's much different than trying to do an LLM to create some type of message to your doctor or rep triggered email, right? And it's that boxed in nature or structure of the focus of that, I think to me is the most interesting and promising aspect right now. I mean, maybe that'll change.
Yeah, and I spoke to a couple of leaders recently as well, and I think, where's AI going to really fit in? And it can definitely fit in the manufacturing components, right, of getting drugs to market, in the clinical trial recruitment components. I think there's definitely some big wins there that could really speed up how companies can move forward and get drugs to market quicker. But, I think only 13% of pharma leaders really say that their companies have effectively integrated AI into, field force facing roles. So it may not be the right place to have it, right? But there's definitely opportunities for it across the board.
Have you seen in any launches, because you've been I was looking at your LinkedIn, right? So you've been very launch focused, at least for the last 5 years or so. Have you seen a meaningful difference in any way on how tech has helped you either move faster or avoid bad decisions?
You know what? It's still growing, and I haven't seen it being adapted, readily across the board. I think a lot of people are reluctant to learn it and use it as well. You have a lot of people they have habits and they don't like to embrace technology. So sometimes they stick with what they do. One of my other roles has been around building that capability within organizations. And we've undertaken many different sessions or digital sessions for teams to power it through and show that this is how easy this is to use and this is what we can leverage moving forward.
So you were talking about adoption of technologies. And again, always working on the vendor side, change management is a real challenge. Like that, no matter how good the tech is, what you're talking about is behavioral change, where people need to buy in, and it needs to be on a couple of levels. This is my opinion, but they need to understand why you're doing it from both a company perspective as well as from a personal perspective. Because at the end of the day, people are people, right? And they're all trying to get through their jobs. Everybody's being asked to do more with less generally, right? And they need to understand, yes, this is going to help the company, but also it's going to help me achieve my personal goals. So how do you, putting aside the tech, it's sort of agnostic to whatever tech you're talking about, how do you deal with change management and getting buy-in from an organization?
Yeah, and I mean, that's, as I said, one of the other roles I have is around capability building in an organization. I've done that in 2 different companies, and it's developing that major shift in belief, right? So you have to create some noise and excitement around what you're trying to deliver on and educate on, right? I think when it comes from leadership that we're going to be all in on AI or we're all in on digital, then that really helps support the message. And if you're working with good leaders, then they can help drill that from a top-down perspective, and then it's easy to execute. But there's novel ways of doing it, and really putting it into some potential competencies within individuals' development plans as well, right? In order to get ahead to tomorrow, or what got us here today is not going to get us to tomorrow. I think we need to be more digitally savvy or leverage technology and embrace it a little further. And once that's mapped out, maybe that's part of individuals' development components, then it's easier to sell it across.
Yeah. And I always have a lot of respect for people trying to do this in pharma, right? Because forever on the tech side, you heard things like fail fast and the like, which is legitimate, but also you guys are working in an industry where sometimes failure is not okay, right? You can't be experimenting with a new medical information tool and have it give bad information to a doctor. So I think it's like a whole extra set of challenges too for bringing innovation where sometimes it's not actually okay to make mistakes, right?
Yeah, I think that's if you're putting heavy budget behind it, right? I mean, my mantra is still, I've taken it from that industry. It's, fail fast and move on. But if you can do pilots and you can do them quick, short, inexpensively, especially for adopting things like AI. I mean, they should be fairly low risk or, low cost.
Right. You're testing it internally. It's not actually going.
Correct. You're not getting it externally. So that's easier to do. But yeah, to your point, I mean, obviously in the drug development process, it depends on what way you're going to do things like that.
And how have you found that mentality? Like, is it hard to get adoption to that mentality from leadership I'm talking about now?
I mean, because no one wants to fail, right? That's the other issue. If you fail, then that the older mentality is then you haven't delivered on your goals, right? So I think it's adopting that, embracing that culture of failing fast. And that's okay to fail because you tried something new. You've thought outside the box. You've been innovative. And I think that's the only way to be innovative is to fail. Win or learn, right? I think that's the other part of it.
Yeah. I'm sorry to use a baseball analogy with an Irish guy, but it's like if you fail 7 out of 10 times when you're trying to hit a baseball, you're in the Hall of Fame, right? And I think that there needs to be a mindset of we are going to try, we're going to allocate. And sometimes this might mean a 6-month pilot with a team of, 8, 10 people actually putting a legitimate effort into it. There's likely going to be a cost involved and there's an opportunity cost of pulling those people off of other things, but it's actually much better to understand very quickly if this is not going to work rather than going slower and more conservatively and 2 years down the road, meaning like, oh my God, I've got this sunk cost of millions of dollars going into something that we don't even like.
Exactly.
Very good. All right. So let me just ask a couple other questions around, I guess, more holistically, when you're building out an organization, because a lot of people that listen to this are in similar roles to you. What types of mentalities are you looking for people that you're bringing onto your team? And how are you structuring your questions to make sure that the people that are your direct reports or the people that you're working most closely with, you think are going to kind of be able to help carry your vision forward?
People perform well on an interview day, and then you need to see them in action, right? And I think I do have, you have a kind of a spidey sense on certain people, whether they're going to fit and they've got EQ and I think it's all about fit and it's all about teamwork and it's all about collaboration. And then it's all about individuals that can help you execute on your vision, develop a strategy, execute on your vision and then go. And, for me, my mantra is, I'll open the doors, I'll set the direction, and then I'm there when needed. If it has to be a player coach mentality, that's fine too. I'm part of that team. Not a micromanager because individuals don't always thrive on that. But, if things are being overlooked or haven't occurred, then you have to dig a little bit deeper. That's when things get challenging.
Yeah, I think that I'm going through this right now. It's kind of a selfish question because I'm building out a team, right? And what I'm really looking for is when you think about it from a team, I am looking for people where it's very clear that they do at least one thing that I can't do or other people on my team can't do, because some of the other stuff is sort of coachable, right? And you can get through it with management as far as, okay, this is the process, how we're going to adhere, how we're going to make sure we stay organized and the like. But looking for that, like, what is your superpower that you're bringing that nobody else can do? I feel like I'm willing, this is just me, but I'm much more willing to take a chance on somebody where I can point to one particular thing versus so much of it is gut instinct and I think they'll be good or not good based on a conversation, right?
Yeah, I think, you generally have a gut feel. I mean, I've usually been right on certain things. You can kind of tell from the word go. And then it's obviously, recommendations from other individuals. If they've worked with them, that's always a good way to do it too. But you have to take, I think what is it, perfection is the enemy of progress, right? So if you're looking for that ideal candidate, you might not get the team on the road. So you have to take a risk. Yeah.
All right. So you've worked in a lot of different roles. We'll end on this: sales, marketing, in headquarters, now in leadership. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self as you're entering pharma, what would that be? Obviously very open-ended.
Yeah, I would say, look, I mean, and we've looked at people, process, performance and technology here, right? I think leverage the technology, embrace it, trust the data, and really lead the people. I think that's the most important part. Get the right team around you and make sure that they're the people you can trust and you can deliver on that mandate together. All ships rise on a rising tide. And I think another piece of it would be, I'd like to reference, Stoicism, I think, and Marcus Aurelius, his philosophy around amor fati, which is love your fate. And essentially, whether that's good or bad, take it and love it, and then control the controllables and learn from that as you move forward. And I think not everything's going to work out the way you're supposed to. Never does, right? But I think everything happens for a reason.
Right. You can control the inputs. You can't necessarily control the outputs.
100%, yeah. And you can only control what you do and your team does well to a point. You got to do the best you can.
Yeah, I love it. Martin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Pharma Sessions with me, Jonathan Kaskey. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to hit follow or subscribe and share it with someone else in the pharma world who might need to hear it. For more on pharma trends, career growth, and business strategies, connect with me, Jonathan Kaskey, on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks for listening.